in our theme here on the Wednesday lunchtime class of just sitting or simply being. Somebody's trying to get through. So yeah, with this simply being just sitting practice, unlike the other meditations where we tend to go to focus, like development of universal loving kindness, metta bhavana, or mindfulness of breathing practice, where we are focusing on the breath particularly. And those practices, well, all meditation practices work in different ways. With those practices, we are focusing on the breath, and that tends to bring together, well, the psychophysical energies of our organism. So they're often referred to as integration practices. And the metta bhavana, clearly the development of positive emotion, and positive emotion is something that's, well, just genuinely very useful in life, and certainly in practicing the spiritual life. But with the just sitting, we are taking a different approach, whereby we're just trying to see what is arising in our experience in this moment. So everything that ever happens to us happens in the here and now. But what is actually going on, when we stop to look in the here and now? What is actually going on in our experience? So in a way, this just sitting practice is just that. I'm just stopping, as it were, to see what is going on in the here and now. So part of what goes on in the here and now, apart from when we stop to meditate, we're usually sometimes one of those overwhelmed by thinking mind. The mind comes in, a train of thought starts up, and we, as it were, or awareness, as it were, jumps onto that train of thoughts. And we can spend a lot of time like that, following that train of thoughts. But it's often not something that we do, that we stand back and try to see thought arising. So I thought today we could have a little bit of a look at thought, have a go at trying to sort of step back and see thought arising. Yeah, so that's what we'll do. So one of the things with thought is we tend to think it's somehow special. It's different from the rest of our experience. You could say that we are very identified with our thinking mind, to the point where we often consider that we are, our thinking mind. It's René Descartes, wasn't it, the French philosopher, who said something like, "I think, therefore I am." And we live in a very thinky world. Thought predominates. And it's a particularly human capacity to be able to think, and to be able to think abstractly. And, it gives us also, a great sort of advantage. Everything like culture, philosophy, religion, to some extent, comes out of that capacity to think about our experience. But The downside of that is that we become very identified with the thinking mind. So the Buddha, at one point, when questioned about what the Buddhist spiritual life was really about, he said, well, it's just about seeing your experience. He said, in the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the thought, only the thought. So thought, in a way, is just something else that is arising in our experience, rather than being who we are. And if we can take that perspective on it, we can start to get some distance on this sort of domination of thinking in our experience. Like I said, I think this is can be quite difficult to do. So often when we're meditating, we focus on the body and we can get in touch with the body and the body's sensations. We can get in touch with what's going on emotionally within us. But often when it comes to thought, it's quite difficult to sort of stand back and just sort of see thought arising as thought. But it can be done. We can just see that. And if we look at thought as just thought, we might actually discover it's not happening in the way that we maybe think it's happening. For instance, we tend to think that we're in control of our thinking. We're the one that does our thinking. And if we look quite closely, it's possible to see that actually that isn't the case. That thinking is just something that is arising, in a way no different to hearing sounds or experiencing the sensations in the body. So we could do a couple of exercises that help us to stand back from thinking, and then then do a meditation together and see if we can get to that point where we can just sort of see thought as arising as part of our experience. So one of the things that I've found helpful to do with thought is to notice the space in which it's arising. So that space is usually up around the head somewhere. But if we notice the space, as it were, where thoughts arise, rather than the thoughts being focused on the thoughts themselves, we can see that they kind of arise into this space. Another exercises we can do is we can try to stop thinking altogether. This is quite an interesting one. It's quite interesting. Well, we'll just do it, I think, actually. See, maybe we'll start with that one. We'll just do it for a few minutes and just see if we can stop thinking. Let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's just get into a bit of a meditation posture and so just checking a bit with the body. Sounds in the room. Sounds outside. can we notice that within our experience, there's a stream of, usually a stream of thinking going on. It might be right at the front of our minds. It might be just at the background, like chatter overheard in a room. Mind's just chattering away. Once we're a little bit tuned in with noticing thinking being there, can we stop ourselves thinking? Trying to stop ourselves thinking. And just notice what happens with that. Are we able to stop thought? Or is it that we can maybe stop thought for a little while, but then later a thought just pops into our head? Let's see if we can, if we are managing to stop thinking, what is it we're doing in order to stop ourselves thinking? Okay, just come out of that. So, Charles, if you want to say, what you might have noticed in that exercise, were you able to stop thought? Were you able to stop it for very long?
Very, very briefly. But when you said to do that, although automatically focusing my attention on the breath,
Right.
going around the nose. Minimal amounts of time, I could be in awareness of that.
Yeah.
I went some
Yeah.
story going on pretty much.
Yeah. So, in a way, you were stopping thinking, but only by focusing on something else.
Yeah, very particularly, this is in my awareness, and it was quite tight as well.
Yeah.
Because and then warm. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else? What happened?
I noticed a real tightness as well here at the front and then down into the neck.
Right.
almost slightly headache inducing.
Yes.
Like I was really trying to stop, and I couldn't do that for very long because it was quite painful.
Yeah.
So then I just kind of almost did the opposite and just came into a really
Yeah.
wide space, more of a letting go.
Yeah. What happened in the letting go?
Well, it wasn't as painful. It wasn't painful,
Mm.
and not like rather than trying to stop thoughts, it was just less holding on to thoughts, just
Yeah.
allowing them to come and go.
Yeah.
Which actually meant that then they sort of fizzled out.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. 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 Great. Yeah. I thought that you get a headache if you try to stop thinking.
Quite strong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, under that instruction, often you know, you sort of like, what do I need to do? Yeah, will, an act of will. Maybe I can stop myself thinking. Yeah.
I think certainly watching the thoughts for me, I remember the first time I ever was did sort of encouraged to just watch your thoughts in meditation or when the thoughts gone. So that is a moment of where's it gone?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's the thought, but somehow it does settle a bit. So let go, it sort of settles. But I had an interesting experience because I could, so I thought, oh, I'll just watch my thoughts rather than trying not to think. And there was a little bit of settling, and I could see some thoughts following it, kind of, oh yeah, that does link to that, to that. And noticing that's the first time it's ever happened on 2 different occasions, completely random thoughts from. I had this thought of, oh, the shop is closed, there's a charity shop next door. And then I thought Nelson Mandela. There was no link, as far as I know, to do with that shop and Nelson Mandela. So there was this kind of weird moving from one thought to the next.
Yeah.
Which was quite weird to notice. And
Yeah.
there was another thought like that. So completely random. Yeah.
Yeah. No, great stuff to notice. Yeah. Yeah, I sometimes late at night, it's quite interesting. You can be aware of that. There's sort of that in between space between being awake and being asleep. But the thoughts just go completely random. It's very interesting to notice because, you know, at some point you're not really quite sure if this is thinking anymore. It can get so bizarre. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that interested me was the Buddhist tradition, I think here,
Yeah.
you often refer to our experience
Yeah.
as if that's separate from thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
It occurred to me that everything that's in our experience is in some sense thought. Because when I started this exercise, that's the same for me as many, I managed to exclude what you might call narrative thoughts or musical thoughts or the echo of your voice, for example. Something still in my head. I focus on the traffic, and I thought to myself, isn't focusing on the traffic itself a thought?
Well, okay, yeah. How is focusing on the traffic a thought? Right.
To appreciate it in some way.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything you
Yeah.
do is
All right. Yeah.
thought. So what I'm saying is there are different types of thought.
Yeah, I think it's probably coming down to sort of semantics or something. Yeah. About what we define as, so we notice everything to some extent, or it can feel like that we notice everything going on within the head, even if we're sort of in that big tone. But I suppose the point with thought particularly, and like you say, it is a part of experience, but it seems to gain this dominance whereby we start to live within that thinking mind, rather than noticing that it's just something else that's arising within experience. And in a way, you know, you could argue that all of those things, the sound of the traffic, what's going on in the big toe, the thinking, is being noticed somewhere by something, as it were. And I think particularly with this simply being just sitting practice. In a way, that's what we're trying to kind of rest back into the place of noticing, the place of seeing. And then everything is just sort of arising in that place of seeing and doesn't sort of dominate our experience. Yeah. It's quite interesting, you know, I felt, Shauna said this thing, you know, like you try to look at a thought and before it's gone, you know. And it's fascinating that the most ephemeral part of our experience, in a way, is thoughts, and yet they dominate so much of our experience at the same time. Okay, whilst we're on this track, let's do another little exercise. So this exercise is about trying to see or know what your next thought is going to be. So again, just coming present to our experience. Aware of body. Aware of sounds in the room, sounds outside. If we able, a sense of space as well. Awareness can be like spaciousness in which experience is arising, sensations, sounds. All the senses. And also coming into that space is thought. It may be like a subvocal experience, like some voice, our voice, as we think of it, talking inside our head. There'll also be images arising. So if it helps, if we focus on the space in which things are arising, but around the head area, you can notice that thought is, as it were, is just popping into this space. Staying with the space, just asking the question, what is my next thought going to be? And as it were, waiting for the next thought to arise. And the thought that arises, did we know what that thought was going to be before it arose? And we can just ask the question again, what's my next thought going to be? Quite interesting, sometimes doing this, the mind can go strangely silent. Usually sooner or later, something will pop in. We know beforehand what that thought was going to be. Okay, just coming out of that one. Any thoughts? Yeah,
no idea. Yeah, I just, all sorts of random stuff comes up. Sometimes there's a train of thought going on, but then something just
yeah.
pops up. Quite interesting how random it is.
Yeah, it can be extremely random. So it begs the question, if we are our thoughts, wouldn't we know what our next thought is going to be? The Buddha asked this question. You might have heard of the 5 ascetics. There were 5 people that the Buddha practiced asceticism with before he became enlightened, and probably very close to the time that he gave the first discourses, which was said to be the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, because it was still set in the deer park, where the 5 that he found went to find the 5 ascetics after he became enlightened. So he asked them this question. He said, you know, so if you are the body, wouldn't you be able to determine your experience of the body? If you are your feelings, wouldn't you be able to decide what you felt? If you were your mental states, wouldn't you be able to just, decide to have a good mental state or not a good mental state? If you were your thoughts, wouldn't you be able to just decide what you're going to think? Any other experiences from that exercise? Anybody know what their next thought was going to be?
That's where the difference of thought. So the mental images,
Yeah.
like seeing my dog in the woods, not quite clear. And then the thoughts like, what time do I need to leave tonight?
Yeah.
Felt quite different sorts of thoughts. But then it's interesting because you said thoughts could be mental images or, and so I was then trying quite hard to guess what the thought was going to be next.
Right. Yeah.
Because it made me realise that they are, they're familiar, aren't they?
Yes.
It's almost like before you put an accurate guess.
Yeah.
It's probably the same ones it was before.
Yes. Yes. So there is that our thoughts often run down familiar lines. But were you actually able to see exactly what the next thought was?
No. It's sort of done in hindsight, I think.
Yeah, interesting, yes. Yeah.
I felt like I could predict that it was most likely going to be a planning thought.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I felt quite pleased about that.
Yes, you know yourself well enough to know.
I couldn't tell, no, I wouldn't be able to say exactly what I was going to be planning about, because that's fairly random.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first started doing these exercises, it suddenly struck me that I am not my thinking, which was quite a revelation. How could I be my thinking, if I don't know what I'm going to be thinking? It's just something that's happening. Sometimes, incredibly identified with that thought, to the point that, that story or whatever that's running, incredibly identified with that. But, we can stand back from that and see perhaps that, we are not that. And maybe we can start to see, or identify away from the experience that's arising, more into the whatever is seeing that experience is arising.
What I was wondering was about not guess thoughts really, it could be completely random, but there is something about influence and somewhere.
Yeah.
Start the day with some gratitude meditation. It usually has a bit of an impact on your thoughts.
Yeah.
So there's a control.
Well, exactly. I mean, and that's the basis of a lot of meditations, that we sort of realize that if we were to be thinking along particular lines, that might be better for our well-being. And thus you have, meditation, psychotherapy, and all those sort of develop. So it's not sort of saying that doesn't exist or doesn't work. We're just looking at that kind of tendency to become very identified with our thinking. And what the Buddha was saying is this identification is causing us a suffering. And if we can sit back into that space where we just see the simple arising of things as they are, well, in that space, we're much less likely to be suffering. A particular example is that the stories we tell about ourselves, which can occupy a lot of our mind, including the comparisons with other people, the judgments we make, all of these things. Anyway, let's spend the rest of the time doing a meditation together. So being aware of myself sitting here. Awareness to take in the body. And taking in the body. Trying to really be within the sensate experience of the body. Sometimes it can feel like we notice the body, but we're, as it were, looking down from the head at the body. But there's another way to come to the body, which is much more allowing awareness to unhook from or flow out of the thinking mind and the headspace, come into the sensations of the body where they actually are. Coming into the body this way, all embodied awareness can be what can be a relief to let go of the thinking mind and allow our attention to dwell in the body as the body. Maybe if we're used to doing the thing that experience of the body with their eyes closed is quite different to our idea of mental projection being a certain shape, looking a certain way. So, ideas about the body in direct experience now. As the body appear. For instance, can we actually notice there is a definite